So I think what is really amazing is that 5 months after Deepwater Horizon exploded on Earth Day it exploded, 5 months later, most Americans are pretty fuzzy on the sheer scale of offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, we really don't have a grip on the scope, the scale. Quick question, how many oil and gas platforms are there in the Gulf of Mexico today? 100, yeah, we've covered a little bit, 500,000. No, there are 4,000-ish platforms off the coast. Now, how big is 4,000? If you were to stack them end to end, they would stretch from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia. They'd be 40 stories tall and about as wide as an aircraft carrier. Now, it takes about 30,000 workers to maintain this offshore oil field. That's about twice as many people as work for the U.S. space program. And what's most amazing is that these 4,000 platforms, thanks to a technique called directional drilling, actually tap into 32,000 wells in the Gulf of Mexico, 32,000 punctures in the bottom of the Gulf. I mean, who knew? I mean, you watch TV and you get the sense that there are maybe a few dozen, a few hundred platforms off the coast, with a workforce of a few hundred brave, hard-hatted men. No, we're talking about a galaxy of platforms and wells. And I first came to understand this about 10 years ago. I was a freelance writer working for the Washington Post, and I went on assignment to Louisiana, and my editor said, write a story about the coastal culture of Louisiana. And I had this idea of interpreting the Bayou region in a fresh way by hitchhiking from boat to boat to boat through South Louisiana. So I grabbed, this REI issue backpack with a North Face sleeping bag bungee corded on. I go down to Louisiana and I start thumbing up and down the bayous. And I get a ride shrimp boat to crab boat to oyster boat. And then one night I got a ride on a supply boat, one of the thousands of ships that are going back and forth between the oil platforms. This ship was taking tools and drinking water and diesel fuel out to a platform 120 miles out into the Gulf. So I thumbed a ride, I got on, I put my backpack below, I go in the wheelhouse, and the captain, a Cajun named T-Brud, which is Cajun for little brother, T-Brud Griffin, he pulls out this nautical chart, right? This map of the Gulf of Mexico to show me where we're going, out into the oil patch. And he unfolds this map, and on this map there are thousands of little X's, concentrating especially in Louisiana, off the coast of Louisiana, but stretching from Texas to Alabama, all these X's out in the Gulf of Mexico. And he said, every one of those X's is an oil platform. And they literally look like stars in a galaxy. And he even showed me, T-Brud did, he said, look, there are so many platforms out in the Gulf that they literally, coincidentally, group themselves into constellations. And so these boat captains literally navigate by the constellations formed by the platforms. So T-Brud will tell his buddy who's waiting for him on the platform, we're just passing the barbecue pit. We're halfway to the bunny ears. And you look at this nautical chart, and sure enough, you could see a rough but discernible description of the Playboy bunny ears made by these platforms like stars in the sky. And it was the first sense I was like, oh my God, how have I lived, 35 years in the United States of America and not known that this galaxy existed? I mean, that would stretch from D.C. to Philly if they were stacked end to end. And so we went further out on this supply boat, and it was nighttime. And these platforms started coming into view, not just on the map, but now they're coming into view, and they're all just lit up, dormitory lights, hazard lights, all kinds of lights lit up, and they have their own individual diesel generator that creates electricity that powers the whole platform. Some of them, again, 40 stories tall. And so these platforms start coming into view literally at the same time that I'm seeing it on the nautical chart. And after we've gone just 30 minutes, we're surrounded by platforms in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Louisiana. And we go further, and suddenly that's all we see. Land, after a few minutes, land is long gone behind us. And we're literally surrounded by this noisy forest of illuminated towers of oil structures, right? And they are noisy. A diesel locomotive, right? We used to use coal for our locomotives. Now locomotives are diesel electric, so they have generators that take diesel fuel that turns a turbine and creates the electricity for the locomotive. Imagine passing thousands of structures that sound like locomotives. That's how tall they are, because each one of them has a diesel generator creating this sound for all this power on these platforms, 4,000 of them tapping into 32,000 wells. And I remember, 2 in the morning, we were getting to the platform we were going to in the middle of this oil patch. And it was a clear night in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, literally, I looked up, I could see the stars above. And all around us, we were just surrounded by these platforms, each one illuminated. A mile away, you could see, a blue flash in the distance of this dark, illuminated forest of oil platforms, a blue spark in the distance, and it's a welder a mile away on another platform. And I remember looking up at the stars in the sky in the Gulf of Mexico and looking around at all these platforms around me and thinking, they are like reflections of the stars. There are that many of them. 4,000, 32,000 wells. This scale, this scope is what's missing in this conversation about the oil spill. As our beaches are blackened from Florida to Texas, we have to understand the scope and the scale. 1.7 million barrels a day from the Gulf of Mexico. This is our addiction. This is what it looks like. So what do we do about it? We have to get off of offshore oil and off of oil completely and on to offshore wind power. I mean, we could power all our automobiles just from the electricity of offshore wind. April 20th, Earth Day, 2010, the same day Deepwater Horizon exploded and sank. The state of Virginia, right down the Potomac from Washington, D.C., where we are, the state of Virginia released a report on offshore wind capacity off the coast of Virginia, and it said, using a small fraction of the coast, in no way disrupting any wildlife or ecology, no impacts on naval operations, no visual impacts to speak of, using a small fraction of the Virginia coast, we could generate enough electricity for 3.6 million electric cars. In Virginia, the state that's been leading the push for offshore drilling. So that's the one thing that Americans need to know, the scope of the drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, the fact that they literally look like stars in a galaxy when you go out there. There is no way to reform something this big through regulatory reform alone. There's no way to erase human error when this many human beings are involved in this dangerous activity. There's no way to rule out equipment failure when you've got 4,000 oil wells like we have in the Gulf of Mexico today. We have to get off of oil. We need windmills, not oil spills. We need windmills, not oil spills. Thank you very much.